You have a sales force out there that for 100 years has been telling their customers, I am your one throat to choke. Anything you need, I'll get. Call me anytime. I'm your person. You have to make sure they're engaged so they understand how digital can make them better at their jobs. And I think so many people miss that simple step. They got two silos working side by side, and when they finally roll it out, they're like, I'm shocked it doesn't work because they can't get the organizational support because they haven't talked to the sales leaders.
3 out of 10, guys. 3 out of 10 companies that we surveyed have gotten e-commerce right and are seeing positive ROI. That's astonishing to me, guys. The amount of companies that are still struggling with e-commerce. I mean, some of these companies are on their third attempt to get it right, and they've cycled through high-profile leaders. They've cycled through major investments on systems, and they've all promised that they will be the answer to a positive ROI with e-commerce. Now, some leaders have even given up trying to measure ROI and are just simply trying to get their e-commerce initiatives to a usable state. Now, guys, this isn't the way it has to be. There are 3 factors that they need to consider in this. One is, what is the minimum viable product that they are building and implementing from an e-com standpoint? The second factor that needs to be considered is there adoption around the e-commerce instance, both from what your internal teams are doing and what your customers are actually doing on a day-to-day basis for ordering. And the third, which is probably the most important, is attribution. How are you measuring the success of your e-commerce investment? Because it goes way beyond just measuring what's in the cart and what's coming through with your digital transactions. Jason, let's unpack the first topic here of minimum viable product here, because a lot of companies are putting too much pressure on themselves in what they actually stand up out of the gate with their e-commerce initiatives.
MVP is a concept that was pioneered by some of the brightest, minds of our generation, essentially, and some of the, I guess, best companies out there on the technology front. And what it represents is, what can I build, and what can I put in front of customers that is going to meet a minimum threshold in order to quickly start getting back data, right? Because what a lot of distributors do, and this is a major mistake, is that we sort of approach it like it's a waterfall. Like, hey, we're opening a new branch, we're opening a new warehouse, so we're going to get together, we're going to meet with all these stakeholders. Generally, customers are not involved as stakeholders, and then we put together this 1.5 year, 2 year project, and I've seen it cost as much as $20 million. And then at the end of that, you have a product that has never been tested, never been vetted by a customer, and you find the customers don't want to use it, right? And so an MVP is a way to avoid that.
We have actually seen some things work extremely well when doing this. If you have a really good idea of who to prioritize the MVP around from when it comes to your customers. So segmenting your customers into, the head versus the long tail. There's a lot of distributors and manufacturers out there who are designing their e-commerce instances for the long tail customer, and they overbuild and it takes forever to get adoption around it. What is an alternative strategy for leaders to consider when it comes to design an MVP around their customer segments?
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, James. That, long tail, in my view, is the icing on the cake, but it can't be the primary focus right out of the gate. And you'll hear stories from other distributors, sort of large scale distributors, that have really made a strong play in long tail. But what you'll find in most cases, they've already learned about e-commerce. They already have been successful in e-commerce and digital selling. And so, at the end of the day, like, we need to do what we're good at. In our business, we're good at relationships, and we need to leverage those relationships with our best customers, with our core customers, to invite them into this process and involve them in that, and not only the design phase but also in the implementation phase and the testing phase, right? And in an ideal world, I would never build an enhancement that I have not put in front of 5 to 10 customers to get direct feedback in some sort of prototyping fashion. And so I think it has an added benefit, which is what I found, is that customers appreciate that. So if you're going to your customers, your best customers, and you're saying, hey, we're actually not that good at digital, we want to be way better, we want to build for you, even if you get it wrong at first, there's a lot more, I guess, patience, and it doesn't necessarily hurt your relationship with customers, which is one of the primary concerns, I think, with wanting to go long tail, is because they don't want to rock the boat for customers who are already doing business with them, and especially sales folks are really sensitive to that. John, is that your take as well?
Yeah, I would say just concur on what you said, Jason. I think your digital platform needs to be an extension of your human being resources that you're using in the field for your biggest customers. And I think that's the key. And I think a lot of people miss that. They design for the long tail, not for the biggest customers.
Yeah, that's great, guys. So let's move on to the second part of this, which is once you have your MVP, how do you start to gain adoption around this MVP, both internally and externally?
I think this is where the approach of working with your best customers is very beneficial when it comes to adoption, right? Because they have an invested interest in you being successful in digital. Your long tail customers don't necessarily have that, and so what we want to see is, we want to have this MVP in place, but we don't want to stop that forward progression, right? So at that point, once you have your MVP in place, you've brought your customers into that process, they're going to continue to support that, and you're going to invite them to use the platform, you're going to take their direct feedback, and as you do that, you'll find that they'll be excited to use the platform. And if you build a platform that your best customers love, you want to go find more of those customers, or you have those customers that aren't really engaged, then you can sort of count on the fact that those features are going to translate really well. That functionality is going to translate really well to those other customers.
James, I would just add to what Jason said. I think people forget about the internal aspect big time. You have to engage your internal teams. Many e commerce teams operate in a bucket. And when I talk to them and when we work with them, they're like, what do the salespeople say about it? Well, they don't know, right? So you have a sales force out there that for 100 years has been telling their customers, I am your one throat to choke. Anything you need, I'll get. Call me anytime. I'm your person. You have to make sure they're engaged so they understand how digital can make them better at their jobs. And I think so many people miss that simple step. They got two silos working side by side. And when they finally roll it out, they're like, I'm shocked it doesn't work because they can't get the organizational support because they haven't talked to the sales leaders.
Guys, let's talk about the third and final segment here, which is attribution. Uh, what advice are we giving to manufacturing and distribution leaders on how they should be looking at the ROI of their e-commerce investments?
I think at the end of the day, what I want to see is, I want to see insights, right? I need to understand customer behavior, customer journey. I need to know how engaged they are with the platform. Like, that's what a leader needs to understand about web, right? You don't need to understand what a bounce rate is necessarily. You don't, there's all these different analytics out there and attribution that is happening. It doesn't have to be a technical understanding, but you need to be intentional about setting those boundaries, right? And in digital, we have all sorts of ways to do that. It doesn't necessarily translate as well to offline sales unless you've built that in. But basically, what we're saying is, hey, like, if we're seeing users interact, say, with certain products or product lines online, and then they buy that product, they come into the branch or they make a phone call and buy that product, you as a leader, as a decision maker, need to know that that happened, right? And you need to be able to say, well, digital played, X percent was 20% of that sell, even though the shopping cart had nothing to do with it. And as a matter of fact, we've worked with manufacturers and distributors like combos that have essentially said, you know what, we cannot get our pricing right. We're just going to turn this into our catalog and customers can request a quote, right? And they saw sales skyrocket. And so at the end of the day, what we're saying is you need to understand how your customers are interacting with you, and you need to attribute each channel with their portion of how they interact with that revenue overall.
Yeah. I think for me, it kind of comes down to math. And the more channels your customers buy from, the more online engaged they are, the more they're going to outgrow the market. There are tons of examples. The more channels they're buying from you through digital, branch, VMI, someone at the location, coming in at the counter, the more channels they buy, the bigger of a customer they are, the faster they're going to grow. So I think many people do not attribute the digital to the total sales. And the leading companies are doing that. I mean, for instance, this year, Fastenal says that 74% of their total revenue comes from customers who are buying in more than 4 channels. So that's branch, digital, VMI, at the counter, right? You name it. They obviously are tracking online engaged. Their digital engine is driving their overall business, their core business. So you have to track online engaged. And you got to attribute what your digital platform is doing to accelerate your traditional business.
The question that I'm always looking to answer is, from a customer experience perspective and from a revenue perspective, would, if my customer spent $1 million with our company today, last year or the last 3 months or whatever it is, what percentage of that $1 million would have happened or not happened due to digital, right? I'm trying to answer that question for not only digital, but for marketing and sales and across those various channels. And the great news is that the tools today to get to the bottom of that are rather robust. They're not expensive. And you can get a lot of great data, even from GA4, for example, which I know a lot of folks are struggling with right now with a recent change. But even GA4 has went towards this engagement model more than, say, a page view model, right? Because engagement's so much more important than, say, how many pages have been viewed in the last 30 days. And so I think it's really important, James, to understand what's most important to your business. Is it that engagement? Is it the number of touches? Is it the amount of revenue going through the shopping cart? All of those things. And then you need to essentially build a scorecard, and you'll probably need some help with this if you don't have strong, web analytics experience on your team, to build a scorecard that can intelligently inform you of how customers are interacting with you.
So if you're a manufacturing or distribution leader out there who is wrestling with your e-commerce investments or on a journey to improve the ROI from your e-commerce investments, take a hard look at developing an MVP, which is a minimum viable product for your core customers. Beyond that, make sure you focus on adoption, both internally and externally, to get your teams leveraging the tools in e-commerce instance. And then finally, look at overall attribution. Don't just measure your e-commerce by the transactions through the cart. Look at how it's helping your sales teams, how it's helping your customer, find the right products, get them to the next purchasing state, and help with that overall digital experience. Jason, John, thanks for your advice today. Great insights.
Thanks for having us, James.
Thanks, James.
Thank you for watching. If you liked what you heard and want to put some of these insights to use across your teams, please reach out to us at dorngroup.com. If you'd like to receive more unique insights like these on mastering channel performance, whether you're a manufacturer or a distributor, follow us on LinkedIn and our YouTube channels.